followed by his time as Minister of Employment and Social Development and Minister of National Defence. In 2017, Jason Kenney made the move to provincial politics, where he was elected as leader of Alberta's Progressive Conservative Party and MLA for Calgary-Lougheed. He then helped create the new United Conservative Party, was elected leader, and became leader of the official opposition. In April 2019, he led his party to an election victory to become Alberta's 18th Premier. Please join me in welcoming Premier Jason Kenney.
Thank you so much, Angela, Kathy, and all of you. Your worships, you have the best title in showbiz. And counselors, administrators, and all of you, thank you very much for the diligent work you're doing here this week. And I've been hearing back from provincial ministers with whom you've been meeting about the constructive discussions on important issues. So I'd like to begin, though, by talking about something that I know that is on all of our minds and hearts that matters so much to Albertans, and that is the crisis unfolding in Ukraine today. I see a lot of yellow scarves out there and flags. God bless you. Apparently they're running out of Ukrainian flags in the Edmonton stores, and that just is one small sign of the solidarity. I just came from a meeting with the president of the Canada-Ukraine Foundation, to which Alberta is contributing $6 million to support humanitarian relief for the people of Ukraine. In addition to $5 million of support that we have committed to the World Ukrainian Congress's Stand With Ukraine campaign to help acquire defensive non-lethal equipment like helmets and flak jackets, like first aid kits and night vision goggles to help equip more safely the civilian members of the Ukrainian Territorial Defense Forces who are standing bravely and with great dignity for their country. Alberta owes so much to Ukraine and to the Ukrainian people. We all know that. In fact, outside of Russia, Alberta has the largest Ukrainian diaspora in the world. Canada does, and we have the largest diaspora of any subnational jurisdiction. It is no exaggeration to say that Alberta was built in large part to the contribution of people of Ukrainian origin. And so this matters to us. It's a matter of the heart. But it also matters to us to see brutalism and tyranny unleashed unlike anything we have seen since 1945, the largest military intervention in Europe since the Second World War. It matters to me. As Minister of National Defence, I deployed the Canadian Armed Forces to Ukraine in 2015 in Operation Unifier, which since then has trained tens of thousands of brilliant young Ukrainian soldiers better to cope with this invasion, an invasion which actually began not 2 weeks ago, but 8 years ago, when Vladimir Putin seized Crimea and began supporting a violent overthrow of Ukrainian sovereignty in Donetsk and Luhansk in eastern Ukraine. So I want to say thank you to so many of your municipalities have passed motions, and you've found symbolic ways to express leadership. I know many of you have been involved in fundraising drives. That's the Alberta spirit. We're moved to see it. And I know that we will be receiving Ukrainian refugees who will be coming to seek safety. And I know that you will all do what you can to ensure that we offer welcoming communities to those newcomers. But let me say this at the same time, and this is a message, I say this as a former Minister of Immigration, we need to demonstrate that the Western response to Putin's aggression is not the depopulation of Ukraine. What he is seeking to do in part is a campaign of ethnic cleansing, of people who identify themselves ethnically and linguistically as Ukrainians. And if millions upon millions of them flee permanently, Putin will ultimately have a victory in the depopulation and the ethnic cleansing of Ukraine. And so it is my hope that if we receive refugees here, that the situation in their home country will stabilize and they will be able to return home. There's another dimension, though, to all of this, which is that it has obviously had massive impacts on the global economy, and particularly the energy economy. For years and years, we Albertans have said to the world that the world needs more responsibly produced energy from this liberal democracy with the highest human rights, labor, and environmental standards on the earth to compete with and displace conflict energy generated by many of the world's worst regimes. And we see that what we have been saying for so long is now clearly borne out in the events unfolding in Europe today, because Vladimir Putin's war machine is funded and fueled by his energy industry. He produces 10 million barrels a day of oil, exports half of that. 5% of global oil exports comes from Putin's Russia. As the Ukrainian foreign minister has said, every barrel of Russian oil is filled with the blood of Ukrainians. And that is why I'm glad the government of Canada put an embargo on Russian oil imports, and President Biden has followed suit earlier this week. But we need the rest of the world to do that, to be able to do that, and to be able to do it sustainably. They need alternative supply of energy, and that can and should be Alberta. That can and should be Canada. That's a message I sent to global energy industry leaders in Houston at the Sierra Week conference yesterday. And so we must work together on an urgent basis to make this a matter of national security, but also a moral imperative. Because President Biden, in order to replace Russian oil imports, is now planning on apparently visiting Riyadh to ask the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to produce more energy, and to visit and is negotiating an end to energy oil embargoes on Iran and Venezuela. Replacing dictator oil with oil from other dictatorships gets us no further ahead. Replacing stopping the enrichment of Putin's regime, instead to enrich the Iranian regime that funds the dropping of cluster bombs on innocent civilians in Syria, or the Saudi regime that drops cluster bombs on innocent civilians in Yemen, or funding further the Venezuelan tyranny, doesn't improve global security, peace, or respect for human rights. So it's time for Canada, in cooperation with the United States, to step up to fundamentally change global energy markets. And I believe if there's a will, there is a way, and we can and must get that done. Friends, let me also, I also want to say a word of thank you to all of you, and through you to your municipal governments, for your tremendous efforts to help guide our province and our people through the last 2 incredibly disruptive and challenging years of loss and anxiety through COVID-19. None of us in positions of leadership had a textbook about how to respond to the biggest global pandemic in a century. And no government anywhere on the face of the earth got it just right. There was no such thing as an optimal response to a pandemic of this nature. Every government in every jurisdiction did its best through trial and error to respond to this. Here in Alberta, our effort was designed to try to protect the healthcare system from being overwhelmed, minimize the number of fatalities from COVID, while also seeking to minimize the damaging impact that restrictions have on people's lives. And in that, I just want to thank Albertans for their care and responsibility. It has been difficult. It has been divisive. Now we must heal. Now we must come together. We all know in our own families, and I'm sure in your municipal governments, in businesses and communities and places of worship, there has been 2 years of debate, often division, and sometimes complete alienation over how best to respond to COVID. But we can spend the rest of our lives arguing over all of that, or we can decide to move on, to leave, we hope, to leave COVID receding in the rearview mirror. It's not gone as a virus. It will continue to circulate. There will be future waves. But we have good reasons to believe that we can move on and getting our lives back to normal and doing so safely. Now, we do see there are new variants, and there will continue to be. I mean, there are viral descendants of the Spanish flu from 1918, 1919 that continue to circulate. But we've never seen, at least not in recorded medical history, a contagious respiratory virus of this nature become more and more severe over time. It's theoretically, I suppose, possible, but there is no historical precedent. And it's particularly with the power of vaccines and the new treatments that are being approved and coming on board, I think we have good reason to hope that we may be able to move forward with our lives back to normal. We see in countries that got hit by the Omicron wave earlier than us, including South Africa, Denmark, and the United Kingdom, that there has been a surge in, since they lifted all of their restrictions in those places, there has been a surge in the BA2 version, subvariant of Omicron. But here's some good news. In England, some new data that was just released this morning indicates that COVID infections are 40 times less likely to result in death than for the Alpha variant a year ago in the winter of 2021 in the United Kingdom. And that's because of the protection of vaccines and a less and less virulent form of the disease. So let us hope that we can move forward. And I know there's been some controversy over the government's decision to introduce legislation to create a consistent policy province-wide with respect to COVID. I respect those with different views on this matter, but in our judgment, it is important that we move forward together, united, with clarity, and not move forward with division and confusion. I think Albertans want us to move forward with clarity and unity when it comes to addressing what will inevitably be future waves and future variants. But most importantly, let me say, I appreciate the partnership that we've had with municipalities in these difficult days. And now, let us move forward together into a brighter time for our province. You can see the signs of economic renewal and diversification happening in every industry and every region of our province. And it's, we haven't just had 2 tough years, a once-in-a-century pandemic, a once-in-a-century meltdown of the global economy, the biggest decline of energy prices on record, but we've had a difficult 5 or 6 years since 2014-15. In fact, only now is Alberta's gross domestic product, our economic output, recovering to where it was in nominal terms at the end of 2014. That has been a lot of adversity for a lot of people who'd lost their jobs, who lost their financial security, and we've all, in government, had to cope with the consequences, with declining revenues, with higher unemployment, with the consequent social problems. I believe much of that feeding into the addictions and mental health challenges, and that, of course, often feeding into problems with social order in some of our communities. And so now, I believe that with this new era of economic growth and opportunity, we can heal many of those wounds as well from 5 years of economic challenge. You know that this government tabled a week ago today, the first balanced budget in Alberta in 8 years, the second in 14 years. Now, some will say that was just the result of lucky energy price increases, and clearly that plays a significant role. But here's the truth. We also had to get our spending under control because we were spending 20% more per person than the average amongst Canadian provincial governments. And we weren't getting enough bang for the buck to justify the big premium in the cost of our public services. So we have had to make some difficult decisions to restrain government spending. And basically, we've gone from a spending slope of 4 to 6% growth a year to about 0.3%. Now, this is not what Alberta went through in the early mid-1990s, 18-20% absolute reductions in government spending. We've simply tried to control spending. And in the process, we now have our provincial spending at more or less the interprovincial average across Canada. We now have a provincial government that is operating as efficiently as the governments of British Columbia, Ontario, and Quebec. So I think that we can tell Albertans that we're getting greater value for their tax dollars, greater care in how they are spent. Because if we were still on that 4 to 6% spending track every year, we would have a multi-billion-dollar structural deficit in place today. The revenue growth is not just in energy revenues, although that matters, but from every source, because we see every industry growing. Last year, despite bad weather, was the best year in history in terms of farm receipts. Over $1 billion of new investment in agri-food and agri-tech in our province. The last year was obviously the best year in the history of our information technology, digital, and innovation sectors. By far the best year ever in venture capital, which is the jet fuel of the innovation economy. And we're doubling down on that, I should say, with our investment of $400 million, with an equivalent matching commitment from the Government of Canada, and forthcoming investments from the telecommunications companies. Together, we believe we will be putting in the ground $1 billion of hard investment in digital infrastructure to move Alberta to at least 98% coverage for reliable, high-speed internet. I think that's hugely important. I know there's many rural communities represented here, and their economic future, their ability to participate in the future digital economy, but also to deliver quality public services in education and healthcare, the future of their businesses is dependent on being able fully to participate in the digital economy, and that's what this investment is about over the next 3 years, to add 250,000 Alberta homes and move us to 98% coverage for particularly rural, remote, and Indigenous communities. I was just speaking to Mayor Sohi about this. COVID has underscored particular challenges in many of our First Nations communities. And I believe that reliable, high-speed internet will help them to do more economic development, provide better services to help bring opportunity and stability to communities that are currently very challenged. So, and of course, we see whole new industries springing up. I mean, $18 billion of investments announced in petrochemicals, most of that here in the Edmonton area. I want to give a shout out particularly to the Industrial Heartland Association and Edmonton Global, all of the municipalities in this region, for working together, for hunting as a pack when it comes to attracting investment. They've been doing a brilliant job. I met yesterday in Houston with the CEOs of some of the largest petrochemical companies in the world. I was doubling down on some of the investments that have already been announced. I can tell you that one of those big investments, they've already decided, they haven't announced this yet, but one of them, they've already decided significantly to expand the scope of a huge project here. And another global CEO of a major petrochemical company that will be making a very exciting multi-billion-dollar new investment announcement in the Edmonton region in the weeks to come. So good news is on the way when it comes to that new and huge new industry. And that also applies to the new hydrogen economy, a future multi-trillion-dollar economy. And we really believe that we, with the second best geological formations in the world, with early leading technology, with infrastructure for CCUS, carbon capture, utilization and storage, the Alberta Carbon Trunk Line, with the incentives that we have in place, with, we hope, forthcoming incentives in the federal budget for carbon capture, that Alberta is well set to be a true leader on on hydrogen. And as you know, billions of dollars have already been announced in that sector. Last year was the best year ever by tenfold in the film and television industry in this province. I see Minister Orr nodding vigorously. That's a great boost to the cultural industries in our province. So I could carry on, but folks, it is so exciting to see that diversification happening. And we believe, in fact, that one of the biggest challenges we'll be facing in the foreseeable future will be skill and labor shortages. By the way, people are coming back to Alberta big time right now. You know, for much of the past 5 or 6 years, we were facing some of those years, net interprovincial emigration out of Alberta. That has turned around dramatically. I mean, I know in Calgary, they typically have 7,000 detached homes on the real estate market. I'm told there's about 400 right now. And I think the inventory is shrinking rapidly in Edmonton and in other communities. Our home builders are going to be very busy in the next couple of years because the word got out to people in Toronto and Vancouver that if you want to be able to afford a home to live in, Alberta's the answer. You sell a home in Toronto or Vancouver and live mortgage-free in Alberta. And oh, by the way, a higher quality of life with lower taxes and a stronger economy. It sells itself. And in fact, in our budget, we have several $1 million set aside to promote people coming to Alberta. We're going to need the talents of newcomers, both from across Canada, but also around the world. And that's why we've launched the Alberta Advantage Immigration Strategy to get a faster and smarter immigration policy in Alberta that attracts people with the skills that we need, There's a big emphasis on rural communities. We have a lot of people in Calgary and Edmonton. We don't have enough, and many rural communities struggling with population stagnation and decline. I want to invite those of you who are mayors of those more rural communities to participate in the Rural Renewal Immigration Strategy, to become host communities. They've done this very successfully in Manitoba. I know we can do it here. And also the Fairness for Newcomers strategy that is to knock down barriers to the full economic inclusion of newcomers, the unfair treatment of foreign credentials, education, and work experience that causes too many brilliant and talented newcomers to be stuck at the bottom of the labor market while their skills atrophy and we don't get the full benefit of their potential. Please work with us on that as well. Now, I have to speak as well about a critically important issue, particularly as we hopefully emerge from COVID, and that is healthcare. Now, Alberta has typically been the biggest spender on healthcare in Canada in per capita terms. And yet we did see very real strain on our system through COVID, and frankly, the system was not prepared. In 2019, before COVID, we had the lowest per capita number of ICU beds in Canada for the province spending more than any province on healthcare per capita. How is that explicable? We had longer wait times for surgeries and many diagnostics than the average of Canadian provinces for a more expensive system. We have brilliant frontline healthcare workers, doctors and nurses, and we have now more doctors practicing, more nurses working in our health system than at any time in our history. But again, there was limited capacity that created great stress at the peaks of COVID. And that's why we are rolling out a strategy to increase healthcare capacity, including a $600 million additional investment in this year's budget, on top of earlier investments. So our health budget has now gone up by $1.8 billion over 3 years, nearly $2 billion increase. And $900 million of that is focused on reducing surgical wait times, in part through the Alberta Surgical Initiative, to contract out more surgeries to chartered surgical facilities. And I'll give you an example of how this is working well. We went through, between 2018 and 2021, the wait time for cataract surgery went up significantly and was 17-week wait time. But since we have expanded the number of cataract surgeries we're doing in chartered surgical facilities, the wait time has gone down to 10 weeks, a 41% decrease. All of them publicly insured, but more procedures being done. That's something we'll be rolling out to other forms of surgical services across the province. We're making huge investments in capital. The recent announcement, is the Mayor of Red Deer here? Oh, he's not. Unfortunately, he was going to cheer. We got Red Deer people here, though. $1.8 billion investment in the renewal of the Red Deer Hospital for Central Alberta. And that's going to serve Central Albertans, 500,000 Central Albertans, and it will just increase. It's 200 more beds for our system. It will serve our whole system well. Of course, in the next year, the completion of the Calgary Cancer Centre with an additional 160 new inpatient beds, the new U of A Hospital Brain Centre for Neurosciences Intensive Care Unit, a $50 million investment in that, a $100 million investment in new emergency mental health treatment spaces at the Peter Lougheed Hospital in Calgary. I saw Josh Connelson here from Mackenzie County, $50 million investment in maternity and other healthcare services way up in Lacrete, a fast-growing community. $90 million in support for rural physician recruitment and retention. That's for about 800 of those docs, so it's a very attractive offering. Additional funding for rural physician, nurses, recruitment and retention, because those are perennial challenges. $200 million of investment to create 1,500 new continuing care spaces in our nursing homes and across the province, and much more. So we need to work together to get results. It's not enough to talk about the inputs and how much we're spending. We've got to ensure that we get the results in all of these programs. I want to speak specifically about emergency management services. There's been a very significant priority for many of you and a challenge in the past year for a whole lot of reasons. I know all paramedics and EMS support staff across the province have been working tirelessly to respond to a historic rise in call volumes. In fact, calls went up by 30% last year. And our EMS folks work hard to respond in a timely way to all of those calls. Now, this is why I'm happy to announce that Alberta's government is providing in this budget an additional $64 million to help ease system pressures and make EMS more responsive to your community's needs. That's more than a 12% increase from the previous year, bringing our total EMS operating budget to nearly $600 million a year. Alberta is also making important investments to address capacity needs, including $28 million for additional ground ambulances and crews, in addition to sustainable funding for helicopter and ambulance services, and we'll have more to say about that very soon. $22 million for increasing capacity in priority projects, including the extension of ground ambulance contracts, supporting integrated operations centres and interfacility transport projects. An additional $14 million for the Hours of Work initiative to address crew fatigue, boost access to surgeries, continuing care and home care, mental health and addiction supports, and emergency medical services. In addition to this important announcement, the newly established Alberta EMS Provincial Advisory Committee will work with frontline experts and many of you to address the growing demand for EMS services across the province. That's led by MLAs R.J. Sigurdsson and Tracy Allard, and the advisory committee will provide recommendations to make sure that our EMS system has what it needs to deliver for Albertans when they need those services. And as AHS, Alberta Health Services, is working on dealing with some key priorities, including addressing the delays and constraints that interfacility transfers and patient handovers place on our frontline paramedics. They're making real progress, starting with more ambulances on the streets in the coming months, 5 each in Calgary and Edmonton, and each year for the next 2 years for a total of 20 new ambulances in our 2 largest cities. Lethbridge and Red Deer will each have an additional 12-hour shift per day, and Airdrie will have a new ambulance next month. We're also, Peter must be here, okay. We're also making progress on an issue that I know is a big concern for a lot of people in this room, and that's having ambulances from your communities called away into Edmonton and Calgary. AHS is working on this issue specifically, and since early February, they report they've made improvements in Strathcona County, St. Albert, Spruce Grove, Leduc, Beaumont, Kalmar, Josephburg, Airdrie, and Cochrane. In fact, they've reduced those trips by more than 40% from Airdrie and Beaumont. And that's just a start. We'll stick with it, and Minister Copping, who's here, will support them and hold them accountable for delivering real improvements. We need it. The point is, we've listened, and we know EMS is important to you, to all of us, to your constituents, and the people you serve. This will help ease system pressure and continue to make EMS more responsive to communities' needs across the province in a way that makes sense to paramedics and EMS support staff. Folks, let me just wrap up by saying that with that and so much more, look, I know people are looking at that potential surplus this year, and they're looking at high oil prices, and all of you have a very long shopping list. And many of you are very effective at communicating those community priorities to us, and that's your job, and we appreciate it, and we're always happy to listen. I think we have to be, as Albertans, we have to be prudent, though. We've been through, you know, the history of our boom and bust economy and the roller coaster in provincial revenues. It would be terribly imprudent of us to assume that we are going to see these high and sustained energy prices for years to come. And who knows? Who knows? This may be our last energy boom. We should act accordingly. I think yes, we must address key pressure points when it comes to public services and infrastructure, and we're doing that. We're doing exactly that. At the same time, I think we still need a fiscal prudence because we don't know what the future holds. Yesterday, oil prices declined by $15 in 2 hours. So my message to you is, please don't ask us to spend surpluses that we do not yet have. And let's together as Albertans decide to get off the roller coaster. That doesn't mean moving away from the responsible development of our largest resources. As I said, I think we have a global security imperative to actually produce and export more. But let's not assume, let's not start spending at a rate of revenues that we do not have, which is unreliable. I think it is very important not to look at potential surpluses as unspent public money, but to look at them as an obligation to stabilize for the long term our fiscal and economic future. And by that, I mean we've now accrued a provincial debt of nearly $100 billion. I want us to put any, well, I should say, rephrase that, but I want us to put a significant share of future surpluses, should we be fortunate to have them, into the Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund, to lockbox that so it generates revenues for decades to come. So the people who attend conferences like this 10 and 20 years from now don't have to face the difficult consequences of a prolonged decline in resource revenue. Let's think not just short-term and not just for the immediate demands. Let's think about future generations. And I believe that's what Albertans want us as leaders to do. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Keep up the great work, and God bless.